What's up guys, and welcome back to Wall Street Millennial. On this channel, we've covered many corporate frauds and failures. Today we're taking a look at one of the biggest frauds in the US pharmaceutical industry, which was worth tens of billions of dollars at its peak. The fraud pitted two hedge fund titans, Bill Ackman and Andrew Left, against each other in a high-stakes battle with billions at stake. We're talking about the 2015 Valeant scandal. Before we get into the video, we'd like to thank our channel members. Members get access to our backlog of videos before they're released to the public. Our current backlog has many interesting videos about stocks, investing, and corporate frauds. Members also get to vote on some of our video topics. Thank you. Valeant Pharmaceutical can trace its roots back to 1959 when a young Yugoslavian refugee named Milan Panic started the International Chemical and Nuclear Corporation, or ICN, in his California home. In the early days, he developed a drug called ribavirin, which treats hepatitis C. Instead of using these profits to fund new research and development, he used it to acquire other niche pharmaceutical companies. Many of the acquisition targets were small operations, and the founders were willing to cash out for a cheap price. By acquiring many smaller companies, he was eventually able to build ICN into a massive player in the generic drug industry. In 1994, he listed the company on the New York Stock Exchange. The company's strong growth allowed the stock price to surge 8,700% when Panic eventually stepped down as CEO in 2002. The company changed its name to Valeant Pharmaceuticals and continued Milan's strategy of acquiring smaller players within the industry. In 2008, Valeant hired a new CEO by the name of Michael Pearson. He doubled down on the company's strategy of growth through acquisitions, signing well over $10 billion worth of deals by 2014. And the strategy seemed to be working. In the 5 years after Pearson took over as CEO, the company's revenue increased more than tenfold to $10.4 billion in 2015. Their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization increased more than 20-fold during the same period. The acquisitions were funded primarily by issuing debt. When Pearson took over, the company only had a few $100 million worth of long-term debt. After his acquisition spree, this number grew to over $30 billion. Because Valeant was spending all of its money on new acquisitions, they didn't have any left to do research and development. Over time, their drug portfolio would become outdated, and they would lose market share to new drugs from competitors. This is why they had to keep acquiring new companies with new drugs just to maintain their current competitive position. Despite the high debt load and lack of organic innovation, investors loved the growth story and went all in on Valeant. The stock price, which had languished over the prior 10 years, surged more than 26 times to a high of $257 per share in 2015. One of the investors attracted to Valeant's growth story was Bill Ackman. Ackman is the founder and CEO of the Pershing Square hedge fund, which at the time managed roughly $20 billion. Around the same time, Valeant proposed their biggest merger yet. They offered to buy rival pharmaceutical company Allergan for cash and stock consideration worth roughly $50 billion. Ackman's hedge fund was the largest single shareholder in Allergan at the time, with the 9.7% stake. Ackman was a large supporter of the deal, as it represented an almost 30% premium over Allergan's stock price. Within a month of receiving the proposal, Allergan's board of directors rejected the deal. Valeant's strategy is to acquire companies and strip them to the bone by cutting R&D expenses. This allows them to squeeze out a few years of high free cash flow. While the takeover bid did represent a substantial premium over the existing stock price, much of the consideration was in Valeant stock. Allergan CEO David Pyatt said, quote, "Valeant's model of cutting and slashing really doesn't work for more than a very short period of time," unquote. While Allergan rejected Valeant's offer, they did accept a higher offer from another pharmaceutical company called Actavis, which valued Allergan at $66 billion. Being a significant shareholder of Allergan, Ackman made more than $2 billion from this transaction. But he wasn't ready to go home just yet. He was a big believer in Valeant's slash and burn strategy. He bought a 10% stake in the company at a cost basis of $190 per share. This represented a roughly $4 billion investment and was one of the biggest positions in Pershing Square's portfolio. But just a few months after Ackman made his position, another hedge fund manager, Andrew Left, shorted Valeant shares and published a report alleging fraud in the company. He published an 8-page report in which he compared the pharmaceutical company to Enron. At the crux of the short case was Valeant's relationship with a small pharmacy company called Philidor RX. Valeant purchased an option to acquire Philidor. While they technically didn't own Philidor, the option allowed them to consolidate Philidor's financials into their own income statement and balance sheet. Left claimed that Philidor owned another pharmacy company called R&O, which is a customer of Valeant. Valeant was using this structure to improperly book intercompany revenue as real revenue. They were essentially using Philidor to book fake sales.
What is your response to what they say is a dismissal of your claims?
Okay, we'll start with the claims made by Valeant that Philidor, they do not own Philidor, but they run the Philidor financials through Valeant. So Valeant has been an over-discussed company on Wall Street for the past year and a half. From the analyst community, obviously it's a hedge fund darling. There's not one person who's even heard about Philidor until 3 days ago. And now we not only hear about it, but they have an ownership structure. They don't own them, but they consolidate their financials underneath them. When they gave that as an answer, obviously it's not me. Look what the market's telling you. When a stock this morning is trading 25 million shares at $100 a share, that's Wall Street saying, hey, we don't trust your answer. Well, now, we'll move to the second part, which is actually even more extraordinary. Why Philidor would have the same exact fax number and the same contact information as one of the pharmacies they supplied to, which was the subject of this $69 million invoice. And the response was, Philidor provides web services and IT support for this pharmacy. So Valeant, which apparently controls Philidor, which Philidor in turn provides IT services for pharmacies, Valeant's making websites for pharmacies, and pharmacies are outsourcing their chief privacy officer to Philidor? None of it makes sense.
Additionally, Valeant would use their relationship to Philidor to increase sales of their expensive brand name drugs. Valeant employees pretending to be Philidor employees would advise customers to buy the Valeant name brand drug, even when there is an identical generic drug available for a fraction of the price. This amounted to a transfer of wealth from the unsuspecting pharmacy patients to Valeant. After a short report was released, the stock price started to freefall. It was now looking like Michael Pearson's success over the past 5 years was built on a foundation of deception. Despite the allegations, Ackman defended his investment in Valeant, saying the company is strong and will recover from the short seller attacks. Another controversial part of Valeant's business was their practice of acquiring the rights to life-saving drugs and jacking up the prices immediately thereafter. They basically did the same thing that Martin Shkreli did, but on a much larger scale. Valeant didn't get as much media attention as Shkreli, because Michael Pearson was a much less exciting person. A few examples of Valeant's price gouging include fluticasone, an antifungal medication. They raised the price of this drug in the United States to be 100 times more expensive than in other parts of the world. They raised the price of heart disease medication isopredolin by more than 500% just a few months after they acquired the relevant patents. They raised the price of diabetes medication Glumetza by 800% shortly after they acquired the company that produces it in 2015. Their price gouging eventually raised scrutiny from regulators, and they were forced to ease off this strategy going forward. In light of the accounting fraud allegations, the SEC, US Attorney's Office, as well as regulators in Canada were investigating the company. With the new public and regulatory spotlight shined onto them, Valeant had to change its whole strategy away from price gouging and accounting gimmicks. Unfortunately, they lacked the R&D infrastructure and expertise to be successful by legitimate means. They were also saddled with $30 billion of debt, which they were very close to technical default on. Berkshire Hathaway's Charlie Munger described Valeant as a morally bankrupt business and compared it to a sewer.
Bill Ackman really wanted you to speak to him because he said you're doing reputational damage to a company you don't understand. He wanted you to change your mind. Will you change your mind on Valeant?
I don't think so. You know, there's been a complaint about my saying that Valeant is a sewer, but I thought the complaint would come from the sewers. It never occurred to me that anybody would be defending Valeant. The main thing that Valeant did that was unbelievably clever was to pay the consumer's part of the deductible for the drugs they were selling. Mm-hmm. That is totally illegal, criminal under the Medicare laws, but that doesn't apply under the laws, under various state laws. And they saw that loophole, and so they did with all the drugs that weren't covered by Medicare. They paid the consumer share of the deductible, and they tried to pretend that it was a charitable contribution, when really it was the functional equivalent of bribing the other fellow's purchasing agent. So it was, sewer was too light a word.
One tip-off, when they paid $100 million
for an option on a company to buy it for $1 or something of the sort. I've never seen that in my life. And kept it secret and changed the account. Yeah, that you know something's wrong, and anybody knows something wrong. Anybody in Wall Street would tell you that there's something nefarious behind a transaction like that. Man.
In early 2016, Michael Pearson was forced to step down as CEO in light of the company's improper financial conduct. Their new CEO, Joseph Papa, tried to make a turnaround by selling off their non-core assets and rebranding to Bausch Health Companies in an effort to move on from their troubled past. But turning around the company is easier said than done. As of the end of 2020, they've only been able to reduce the debt modestly from $30 billion to $24 billion. Since the new CEO took over, the stock has traded sideways. While he was at least able to stop the bleeding, it has significantly underperformed the rest of the market. In 2017, Ackman finally threw in the towel and sold his stake in the company for a $4 billion loss. This makes it one of the most disastrous investments in hedge fund history. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about the Valeant scandal? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.